Now it's time to listen to our keynote speaker. We have with us a very special person to open today's session with her keynote address, Ms. Rajashree Rao. Ms. Rajashree is a globally acclaimed industry thought leader, visionary, advisor, principal consultant, and mentor in next-gen technologies, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, data analytics, robotics, Industry 4.0, Internet of Things, blockchain, and smart cities nation across industry verticals. After working for 20 years in the corporate across the regions, India, US, and APAC, she is back to her roots to venture onto the next biggest growth market in the world. She is currently heading AI Innovation Hub and Partnerships and Ecosystem for R Square Data Labs at Rolls-Royce. She is the Global Director General of GCPIT's SDG's Global Impact Startups. Let me proudly invite Ms. Rajashree Rao for her keynote address. Over to you, Rajashree.
Thank you, Aparna. Thank you for the very warm welcome and already setting the stage. I don't have to state certain facts and figures because you've already laid the foundation for my talk today. And thank you to the participants for joining this wonderful summit and being a part and giving me an opportunity to share some of the thought leadership and what I have come across and how do we work together and drive this agenda of no poverty across the globe. With that, without any further delay, let me get kick started. I'm going to be starting with what has the World Bank set a goal. The World Bank has set a new target of having no more than 3% of world's population living on just $1.90 a day by 2030. So how are we going to achieve this? Especially after post pandemic, there are a lot of things that has completely upturned, and now we need to go back to achieving a bigger target. And how are we going to do this? So let me quickly touch upon some of the key aspects which the MSMEs and everybody else, even like the government policy makers or decision makers, corporates, everybody have to come together to work together to address this particular number one, no poverty or zero poverty by the 2030 plan that World Bank is also set a target to. With that, so what are the different things that I'm going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the key aspects. I think I was listening to the earlier distinguished speaker, and he actually touched upon some of the very important areas which I will also be covering. But how do we go about is what's few points that I will talk about. So one is most important is develop and implement rapid sustainable economic growth policies. Today, one of the things we need to rework and relook are the growth policies. See, the policies prior to pandemic were done with an intention about what they have to address then. But because of the pandemic, the entire dynamics of how the businesses function, how the countries are today suffering, everything has changed. So now the growth policies have to be re-looked into. That is a number one priority, and especially in the areas of health, education, nutrition, and sanitation, and ensuring that and also how do you make this happen for a faster strategy implementation? What can you do? How do you define the policy? By letting these poor, the people on the ground who are suffering, to participate in that policy making, in the decision making, so that you can be able to ensure and contribute effectively to implementing that particular policy. So in fact, there are studies that have shown that at least a 10% increase in countries average income reduces poverty by as much as 20 to 30%. When you bring the people together who are the ones who are going to be literally using these policies, which is going to impact them, if you let them participate in this whole exercise, that will enable faster approach to what we want to achieve. That's number one. Number two is improve management of water and other natural resources. Today there is a huge scarcity of water that's going to come about. It's already there, and the world is heading towards that. And access to water is very important, and if we don't have the basic necessity, there is going to be a huge problem. So how do we ensure that everybody gets access to the natural resources, and how do you utilize this effectively? See, there are a lot of organizations, especially MSMEs, are playing a huge role by going to different villagers, rural, as running some of the rural development programs, and quite a lot of things, adapting to technology and coming up with solutions to address these problems along with the corporate, government, industry bodies, everybody. But to make it, effective, we need to ensure that most of the rural depend on agriculture, so that this particular problem is solved. And water, how do they do water conservation? And that's a very important topic today. It's a huge subject by itself. I'm not going to go deep. I'm just going to leave with you all the thoughts. What are the things you need to address, and how to get out of no, achieve the goal of no poverty, and ensure that everybody comes out of this situation of, not having the basic necessity met. So, with that, most of the rural depend on agriculture or other natural resources for their livelihood. Today, this is one of the transformation that has begun, especially in India. I've been reading a lot of stories about how all the, most of some of the people who are into IT have given up their job and gone back to their roots. They are coming up with, agri-tech and agro-tech, some of the concepts using technology. How could they produce more using less water? What is a method to not to use water and get a better produce? So they're going and educating the farmers. They're trying to make their life better, to have a, high yield with, using the less of water and other methodologies, which is very beautiful. And in fact, there are other people who are also increasing the groundwater level. They're adapting the traditional old methods to increase the groundwater. So these are some of the ways which is being done. But if we educated don't go back and take the support of MSMEs, again, there are a lot of MSMEs especially who are working on different areas. And today with them, if we don't go and implement and adapt these things, educate, I mean, we are going to be suffering. So this is another area which is very important, and MSMEs can make a huge difference here. So the next is, we need to invest and implement in agricultural programs. I'm going to give an example of what China did. China has helped about 800 million people out of poverty since 1978. And how did they do this? As part of its strategy to eradicate this poverty, they set a goal by 2020. In fact, because of pandemic, certain things went backtrack, but actually they have evolved. And what did they do? They set up something called the Agricultural Bank of China, which started lending more than 400 billion to help develop rural areas, especially in the areas of education, infrastructure, and crop production. And one thing I will be sure to say, in the pandemic we've seen a shift. In fact, you take India as an example, because everybody's going back to the roots and focusing on agriculture as one of the core areas. Given that we were not able to import certain crops, there was some scarcity in some of those food grains. Today, we are sitting with surplus production. But now, how do we now ensure the surplus is distributed equally? Today, that is a big challenge because of the there's a big gap in the supply chain. Now the focus has to be, how do we address that supply chain gap? And that has literally disrupted the way how things could work. Now this is another thing which everybody is focusing on. How do they bring back the supply chain or create a new supply chain to ensure that the surplus is met? So that's a very, very important area that we need to work. And I just gave an example of how China has been addressing it. So they focused on, most important is education. That number one. Actually, we have to get back to that. Ensuring that everybody is educated. You can't say that somebody is not educated. Education becomes key. Then, like I said, infrastructure is another thing. Of course, our government has done quite a bit. Example in India, I will take. In fact, our government has, during the pandemic, they have done, build the roads, new railway lines, and too many things. So that we are heading in the right direction. And the third about is the crop production, which is also happened. But now creating the supply chain matters. And again, there are a lot of MSMEs who I have personally interacting and learnt about, who have again helping these villagers or these kind of people to get to the track, or get their produce to the market and those kind of things. But we are still not there. It's only happening at a very small scale. So the next part is, we need to encourage countries to engage in trade as a path of poverty I mean, to path of out of poverty. So how do we do this? Trade is the key growth and prosperity. So today, what has happened is there is a disruption again in the trade given the pandemic. So the supply chain has impacted, which has changed the whole dynamics, and this is something everybody is re-looking at it. As we speak, if you ask me, is there a solution available today? No, but everybody's trying to rethink. They're trying to rethink, remodel, reconstruct, and restructure their existing business model. The supply chain itself is a huge disruption. I'll take the case of automobile industry or information technology. Today, if you look at the demand has gone up for cars, but have you ever even did you even know that one car has about 1,000 chips in installed in it, and that's the kind of requirement that there is. But there is a huge requirement. The demand and supply is not being able to meet. They're not able to meet the demand. Now that has disrupted, especially in the automobile industry, and everybody's trying to figure out what is the way forward. That's one area. If you take similarly, if you talk about it, whether it is fashion, retail, fashion industry or other things, getting the raw materials has also been really a challenge. So how do they all balance this? That again goes back to the supply chain. And how do you recreate that? That is again, everybody is reworking on this. And now again, I'd say MSMEs have taken up different areas in this, in this in particular, not just retail, fashion, even automobile industry, even in different segments to address some of these burning business challenge. So again, I'll say there's a huge opportunity, but we all have to work together. And one, some of the world's poorest countries, what they've done is, today some of the world's poorest countries have addressed their poverty problem by doing trade. And I could quote example, could be Indonesia, Brazil. They adopted this model. So I'm not saying the same model is going to work for all the countries, but every country has to identify what is the model that is going to be effective for them, and that's going to be the trial and error basis. The next is we have to create and improve access to jobs and income. And that is exactly what the MSMEs are doing today. They are creating jobs. They're opening up access, to income, a new chain of income. You take the poor farmer. For him, if they have a middleman, they are selling at a very low cost. After having worked for entire year, he's hardly able to meet his basic necessities. Today, that's what they're trying to eliminate. The MSMEs are stepping in. They're using technology. They're also enabling education to these farmers and seeing how they could bridge that gap. And that is definitely happening, but it has to happen at a large scale. It's not enough. So we're talking about a very small percentage. So the next, again, here is, again, the government programs. And one other gap that I personally also have identified, and I've been working with someone and we discussed this, is part of the government programs. See, the problem is because most of them, the farmers, or due to lack of education, they don't understand what are the kind of programs that is available that can benefit them. So that again, it all circles back to education. So that's very critical, which we all have to focus. The next is progressively developing social protection system that support those who cannot support themselves. I'll tell you, this model, this particular program has been very effective in Germany. So the German government has implemented one of this kind of program. When they have any issues, they have created a social protection system. Even if they are not able to support themselves, where they don't have income, they don't have a house, the government takes care of it. But that is a challenging in kind of developing countries when there is lack or insufficient funds. Now, how do they work this out? Again, that is the model we need to work out, and that depends on the government policymakers, decision makers, and the industry bodies who have to come forward to address these issues. The next one would be providing all people with access to basic social services, including, that's again, it's a reiterating the point, is education, healthcare, and adequate food. Most important, adequate food, sanitation, shelter, and clean water. And let me tell you, in this, in India, there is a person called Ankit Kabatra. I don't know how many people know about him, but this person started a very interesting initiative, which is like, he would go to the different five-star hotels, and if there is a wedding or any kind of function, whatever the excess food is left, he would, he had signed up like a deal with them that they will give that food to him within certain time. So he would, he had this refrigerator which he would put them, and he would give this excess food to those orphanages and others who don't have food. So that was a very interesting program that he started, and it was even recognized by the Queen of England as well. So that he got a lot of funding. He's doing this in a big scale. But during pandemic, this again has disrupted. Now, how are we going to rework this thing? So again, in Singapore, one of the programs that was implemented as part of that is, you take the supermarkets. Now you have these vegetables, and after a certain period they say that those vegetables cannot be used or resold. So what do? They go and create this kind of refrigerator where you can you can store. It's kind of shelves, so people are free. So they install these kind of system in kind of like a condo or a common place, where people, those who need the vegetables and fruits, they can go and take it. So like that, there are different programs. But is it enough to address the challenge that we have? No, it is not. So how do we bring programs to address some of these very important areas is what the MSMEs and other corporates have to work together. It's not one person's job, it's everybody collectively. Today we have to make a difference, but if you all don't come and work together, it's not going to happen. Then, very important, empower people living in poverty by involving them in development and implementations of programs and plans to reduce and eradicate poverty. Again, this is a very interesting model which has been observed by some of the countries, but it's still not effective. At least in the developed nations, this has been quite effective, but at least in developing countries, this has to become effective, given our policies and decision makers. This is again another way to address. Remove barriers to equal access to natural resource and service, which is already covered. Then the last, not the least, is provide access to technology innovation. Today, that's the core. That's a key. We are advancing in fabulous way in technology and innovation. How do we bring this to address the problem is quite critical. So that's an area we need to. And the most important, again, an area which already has covered and people are doing, is microfinancing, but that has still not been effective in some part of the developing countries, especially in the rural area development. So with this, I would say, by measuring poverty, we learn which poverty reduction strategies work and which ones do not. Poverty measurement also helps in developing countries, gauge the program's effectiveness and guide their development strategy in a rapidly changing economic environment. So the most important is, every country has to measure their poverty. Otherwise, we will not understand what program is effective or not. We can create policies, programs, and MSMEs can work, but those solutions, everything cannot be effective if we don't bring all this together. So, with that, thank you so much for this opportunity for me to kickstart on a most burning issue today, and looking forward to contributing towards this in whatever capacity. And thank you so much for joining this session.
Thank you so much, Rajashree, for that powerful session, and thank you for joining us today.